Four cylinders by AMG is somewhat of a sore topic these last few years, highlighted well by this car, the GLC 63, the last GLC AMG that we drove on RBR. It's a 670 plus horsepower hybrid that turned a bestseller into an object of collective hatred by using those underpinnings from the much hated C63. But back when I drove this car, I theorized that the GLC 43, that sits a level below, could be a much better car. It's 300 kg less heavy, it's 30,000 pounds less expensive, and it's all in an entry-level package that is actually identical looking to the 63. And prior to all these so-called 63s with four cylinders, let's not forget that AMG has a long history of loved four-cylinder cars with legends like the A45, which this car actually shares its engine with. But it's not all smooth sailing for this GLC 43. It still replaces a sonorous V6 engine with a four-pot, and it's in a package that is much more expensive than it used to be. So what we're going to do today, we're going to find out what makes this car tick. We're going to also talk a little bit about what I expect the future of GLC AMG to look like, including the return of the V8. And I want to talk to you about a new GLC that is coming, which is a full EV, before we head out on the road and see, is this GLC 43 really a better alternate to that 63? Let's find out. So guys, today's episode of RBR is sponsored by the makers of the perfect driving shoe, and that's Piloty, one of our older sponsors. And today their spring sale starts with up to 45% off, and as an RBR viewer, you get even more off with a code. And you would have seen me wear their shoes in the majority of RBR videos, but the sponsorship was just a couple of videos. But I've worn these for years because they are incredible for just comfort in terms of when I'm traveling, press trips, day-to-day usage, but most importantly, for the purposes of driving. They are incredible for heel and toe feel and general pedal feel for the driver. I liken it to almost upgrading from a standard steering wheel to a performance steering wheel, but for your feet. Now, Piloty were kind enough to send some of their latest ones over to me. This is my personal favorite. It's called the Shift. I'm wearing like the older version of this now. It's got the tire pattern on the sole, wonderfully mimicking your car. We've got Italian suede here again, mimicking the type of materials you would find in performance cars. The shape is really smart as well, and it really mirrors something like this, like a 911. It's a smart shoe. And the type of heel and toe feel that you get off this shoe, again, it's just incredible. And then the specs of these shoes as well, just like cars, you've got like greens, you've got tans, you've got pure black. And it's great because you can choose the one that perfectly fits your performance car. The newest model is the Compass. It's essentially almost like a collector's item with carbon fiber and surrounded by leather, just like a high-end performance car. So really, proof in the pudding for me is just how much I've used them over the years. And now's the absolute best time to buy it with the spring sale going on, and RBR viewers get an additional 15% off. Just use that code RBRM2025. You'll get an additional 15% off, and they are now shipping worldwide for RBR fans as well, which is absolutely fantastic. Huge thanks to Piloty for being there with us from day one on the channel, and to you guys for always supporting us and them. Now, let's get back to the car. So the great thing about the new GLC 43 is, much like the CLE 53 and the E53, it uses the full fat AMG body from the model above. And that wasn't the case in the past. If you look at the previous GLC 43, all AMG did was take the standard AMG line, replace the front grille, and give it a different set of pipes and wheels. That's not the case here at all. If you compare this directly to the 63, it is nigh on identical, with the only differences being the pipes on the rear. And of course, you've got a choice of wheels. But generally speaking, that whole body, very, very different then to the standard AMG line GLC, which is of course a great boon for buyers of the 43. It's a nice aggressive body, got that proper 63 front end, same with the rear, and it's something that you're going to enjoy looking back at. So versus the 63, not all that much lost at all in terms of design. What is lost in this car though is that wonderful sonorous V6 that was in the previous model. That would easily just put a smile on our face every time that we drove it. That's something that this four-cylinder does not excel at. What is good about it though is that it shares basically the same basis as the A45 engine, just fitted longitudinally in here. The other great thing about it is that unlike being a mass-produced engine like that V6, this is actually a one-man, one-engine built by a single technician at AMG, hence the badge on our engine. And that's great. This is all part of AMG heritage. This is how they build the V8s at the AMG factory as well. And the irony here is that this is pretty much the same engine that they use in the 63 as well. So now the 63, even closer to this car. But it's actually a pretty clever engine as well. It's got an electric gas turbocharger that was derived from AMG's learning from F1 that basically spools the turbos before the exhaust gases can get there. You've got your typical hybrid belt starter generator that gives it extra boost of power as well. And altogether you get 500 Newton meters, 416 horsepower, and a sluggish 0 to 60 of 4.8 seconds quoted. We'll see if it feels that slow on the road. But as an entry-level car, not too bad of a look. Then we have the 4MATIC system that powers that, which is a bit archaic. And it gives you 31% power going to the front, 69% going to the rear, so not fully variable like you have in the 63. The gearbox, however, is a really good one. It's their 9-speed MCT wet clutch gearbox, so it should be really decent at shifting quick. Steering is AMG speed sensitive steering, and you also got the benefit of 2.5-degree rear wheel steer, and your suspension is AMG's active ride control with adaptive dampers, which again is a good suspension system, but this is where the car begins then to differ a little bit from the 63. While we do have some rigidity measures, it doesn't have the active roll stabilization of the 63, and it doesn't have the active engine mounts either. But then, versus the 63, it's like 300 kg lighter as well. So probably don't need it as much as that car does. It's also £30,000 cheaper, as we said, but basically using the same engine for all intents and purposes. Yes, 250 horsepower less. Does that really matter? We're going to discuss that as we go out in a minute. 63 really was a failed experiment, wasn't it? I've hardly seen any on the road. I've seen a lot more of the 43s. And this has been interesting to me because I've been trying to review this car for years. In Germany, every time I've asked, haven't had a press car on fleet. UK haven't had a press car. So a huge thanks to Mercedes-Benz of Slough getting me this car across, because I think this could be quite a popular car for people to jump into. Now, price-wise, things are a bit problematic also for this car in the UK. The GLC 43 starts at £73,000 and goes up to a midnight edition, and I think it's called midnight because it's going to give you nightmares, of £88,000 in that version, which is just crazy to me. But the problem here to me is that you compare it to its closest rival, which is the X3 M50, and that starts at just £66,000, and it comes with, frankly speaking, a much better engine. So this is problematic in itself. As we said, yes, it is very far away from the £109,000 63, which I don't think anybody wants, but still something that we're all struggling a little bit with on new AMG pricing here. One car I want to keep in the forefront of your mind during this review is a car that I've not actually told you that I own. It's a GLC 300DE. Now, this plug-in hybrid is around about the same price. It's £70,000, which I know sounds a lot, but actually I think it quits itself really well versus this similar price car, and that's something that we are going to talk about as we go out for a drive. It may sound strange to you at the moment, but believe me, it's not as weird as it first sounds. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the future of GLC, as I mentioned. If you haven't seen my latest video on Inside Track, our new series which talks about news and rumours, this is no rumour. AMG are bringing back the V8 and they're plugging holes in their lineup, and I think that the upcoming GLC facelift, which is actually not that far away, will be one of those cars. If you didn't see that video, here's a little clip of Mercedes-Benz's CEO filling you in a little bit on what's happening.
You saw last night at AMG that maybe we're kind of plugging some holes. Yeah, so the resurrection of the V8, the brand new flat crank V8, I mean, who is insane enough to do something like this at this day and age? Well, the AMG people are. If you carefully looked at the chart that Michael showed yesterday, you could see that there were other ICE variants also in the AMG portfolio coming. So I would say on the ICE side, we're refreshing, renewing, and maybe tidying up the picture a bit.
So there you go, a new flat plane crank V8 confirmed, and I think the GLC is a prime candidate to get that, considering what a great seller it was in the past with the V8. Now, will it be a mild hybrid? Will it be a plug-in? Only time will tell, but I am certain in my own head, and I'm predicting this, that the GLC 63 will get that V8 in the future. Now, Mercedes are not just filling holes at AMG, they are also improving things in terms of their lackluster EV lineup. And I think that's best shown by the upcoming C-Class that's going to have a full EV variant, and the GLC as well. Now, one thing that is immediately different, as you'll see, they're not going for a whole different design for EQ cars. Now they're going to have a two-pronged approach where the EVs basically look very similar to the combustion cars, which is great, and the recent prototype drives have proved that in the case of the GLC, though we can see little things like Their starlights that they're putting in everything these days, seeping through. And I think that we will see this car this year. And we have quite a bit of information thanks to those prototype drives as to what we can expect from this new age of EQ cars. First of all, they're based on Mercedes-Benz's MB.EA architecture, which is the MB electrical architecture, where cars like this, the new C-Class EV and the baby G-Class will all be based on. And it's an 800-volt architecture that allows for quick charging of 320 kilowatts, so you can get a ton of miles within just 10 minutes. You guys are used to all of this talk. But we also have a lot similar to the new CLA. So we have a 94.5 kilowatt usable battery, which gives 404 miles, and it's a new battery, an NMC battery. We have two variants available as well. So we'll have a 4MATIC with over 480 horsepower and a rear-wheel driven single motor version of just over 280 horsepower as well. So it's nice to see that we have now a two-prong approach going here, where our ICE cars and our EVs are looking similar, but they have their own uses, which is great. Now guys, let's have a very, very quick look at the interior before we head out and see how this entry-level GLC 43 acquits itself on the road. Now the GLC interior is a nice interior, and the good thing about the 43 is you get the main bits out of the 63, unlike the past where we didn't get things like the lovely AMG control buttons on the steering wheel. That is now just a standard option, and it's good because when you're paying this type of money, you're expecting that in here. So, of course, in terms of those AMG options, you've got drive modes going from Comfort all the way to Sport Plus. There is no race mode because this is a 43. You've got your AMG performance screens in the main screen here as well, which tells you what the vehicle is doing in terms of suspension, what the engine is doing in terms of power. And then in our driver zone, you've also got the unique Super Sport display, which is configurable, along with all the other GLC displays, including off-roading mode as well. Now, while I love this interior in the GLC, generally speaking, I think the ones that we get in the UK, there's only two options. There's either this black interior here, which is really quite, it looks quite sad looking, doesn't it? Because you can't really see much going on. Or there's a red version, which is black and red, which is a bit more exciting. And my issue with this is I live with a standard GLC, as I said, and that interior just looks so much better than this, or at least, at the very least, on par with it. I just think it looks way better because you have more options in the standard GLC in terms of colours available to you in the interior, and that's something we've lost in recent years with Mercedes AMG product in the UK, where you just do not get enough interior options unless you're going for like G-Wagon, GT or S-Class, which do have good options. Everything else either just has plain black or, if you're lucky, a bit of red, which is a real shame, particularly when the pricing has gone up so much. So I apologise if I'm having a moan in every other video, but unless we talk about it, I don't see any change happening. And if I had this interior in a GLC 43, I think I'd be pretty close to suicide in a few months. Okay, maybe going a bit far on the suicide point, but it just looks like it's a diesel AMG line interior with just your black leather, your microfiber and your red stitching hat. We've had that since 2014, 2015 in A200 AMG lines, right? It doesn't deserve to be in a car that is starting at £73,000, my view. Then, this is a car that starts at £73,000. Doesn't particularly sound amazing, but we know that already. We know that already, but we also know that this is a great engine, as we've seen in the A45, as we saw in the C43, that I actually thought was a really fun car to drive. Let's see now if the GLC 43 just makes a lot more sense than the 63 on the road. It was very strange to me how a car that has historically been quite a big seller for AMG never had its own press drive, and as far as I could work out, didn't really have any press vehicles. So I've been quite keen to try this since I've driven the 63 especially, to just come to terms with it and see, you know, is it as good of an option as we thought the C43 might have been? I'm also kind of grateful for the delay because in the meantime now I've driven the main rival, which is the M50, and I've gone and bought myself a GLC 300 hybrid, so I've got this good idea of what the Mercedes-Benz side and now what the AMG side can do. So let's get into it. First 100 yards feels very much like an AMG, very heavy steering. The suspension is very much on edge, and that's in Comfort as well, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But you're in no doubt that you are in an AMG. Gearbox is predictably brilliant, which is always one of the best things about the modern cars, that they just they shift so well, regardless of the fact if you're in entry level or not. So we're in Sport Plus, so the engine is in its best mode in terms of responsiveness, and it's a good engine. You know that you can feel that electric gas turbocharger really giving you the power very quickly alongside the starter generator. It's a very responsive engine, you know, hardly any lag at all. And in terms of delivering performance, it's got that A45 feeling. And I found that in the C43 as well, that this was an engine that felt like an AMG engine. It didn't feel like something borrowed from Mercedes-Benz. It felt very much related to A45, and that's a great thing about the 43s of this generation. Now obviously the downside is that we know we haven't got the type of sound that we really want, right? It's not even akin to what the A45 used to be. A lot of this is EU regs, but a lot of it is also the fact that it is a four-cylinder engine, and that is the format of this vehicle. You can play around with the gears, and the best time to try and hear the sound is to put it into manual mode. You get some barb shifting up, and you know, shifting down you might get a few burbles, etc. But it's nothing too pronounced that you would hang your hat on like the previous, like the V6. So responsiveness of the engine is good. The next thing is the speed. Now, of course, similar horsepower to the A45, but in a much bigger car, which is why we have that 0 to 60 figure that is a lot slower. What is it in reality? Let's do a launch control and see how it does. Right, so let's test the launch out now. We're in Sport Plus. Race start on. Slow to take off. That's 0 to 60 of 4.3, which is pretty good. So probably a 60 to 100 to what, 4.4. So that's a pretty decent uptick on the official figure. So yeah, 4.3, not too shabby at all. It's not that sweet spot of, you know, it should be around about 500 horsepower for this size of car to be a proper performance car, but as a daily car that's giving you the ability to go sporty when you need to, it's fine. And that is particularly when you pair it to the 4MATIC, which, yes, it's an archaic system, but in all times of the year, it's going to put down the power really well. And, you know, this system is tried and tested in the old 45s as well, and it delivers the power on the road really well in the GLC 43 as well. And also remember that engine shares its components basically with the 63, right? The other thing shared with 63 is, of course, the gearbox, and the 9-speed is a real highlight of this. So where you have a good responsive engine, the 9-speed behaves in a fantastic way in terms of shifting up and down. There's never a delay. And for an entry-level car, I think it's better than all the other rivals in that regard. In terms of pure shifting, this is a great gearbox that shifts on demand. And then we come to handling, which is interesting. It definitely feels lighter on its feet than the 63. You cannot hide 300 kg, despite how good the anti-roll stabilization is on that car. You know, you do eventually feel the weight of it. This feels more nimble, feels more like the previous car, but still nice and rigid. We've got more rigidity measures in this, as we displayed, than the previous generation. So it acquits itself well in handling, and the best part is the steering, where again, you know, you're sharing components with the models above. The AMG speed sensitive steering with the rear wheel steer, it shortens the size of the car, but you get really great feedback, even in twisty bends. So from one steering position to the next, you get nice feedback through the wheel. You don't get that in all of the rivals. So that is always a pleasure, even within the entry-level AMGs, and no different here in the GLC. So you've got those additional rigidity measures, you've got good steering, you've got the rigid suspension, and the suspension is quite hard, as I said. But then I think the problem is, you're doing all of this, and it's clinically good, it's technically good, it's doing a genuinely really good job of being a performance SUV at this level, but where is the joy? Like, where is the £73,000 worth of AMG joy? That's where I struggle here. That's where I'll look back at the previous one, the V6, which didn't drive anywhere near as well as this does in terms of handling, etc. Granted, but the key fact was that engine kept you happy, and it made you smile, and sometimes that's really, really important. Though where this is a plus point is you compare it to the GLC 63 SE Performance, which sits above this, and you'll have as much fun and emotion in this car. Like, Like, you don't need to go above. You're not going to get more emotion out of the 63. I promise you that. This car will satiate you. But then, speaking of 63s, how can you not compare it to the previous gen GLC 63S? Particularly when this is priced where it is. You can pick up one of those pre-facelift for, ironically, 43k on the used market at the moment, roundabout. And if you go to facelift even, it's 55k. And you still have much of the mod cons that you have here, but with an absolutely stonking AMG engine that is still used in a lot of their V8s today, and more dynamism than this, because that was for many years, you know, king of the Nürburgring. So how can you not consider that in front of this, considering where the price is? The other issue is, and again it's linked to price, is the brilliant X3 M50, which is coming up on the channel very soon. I've already filmed it, and that is a fantastic car with a great inline-6 engine that sounds lovely. And then the other side of it is, when it comes to the comfort side, it's just so much more comfortable, so much more pleasurable to drive normally than this car is. So again, that's a real concern for me. The other thing I found strange in this is that normally when you go into comfort in an AMG, things tend to settle down to the point of being pretty similar to the Mercedes-Benz variants in terms of comfort and usability for daily activities. But being in comfort in this car, it feels on edge all the time, and that's not just in terms of suspension, which is markedly different to particularly the plug-in hybrids that come standard with the air suspension in the rear axle, but there's also things like the engine response. It's just very, it feels like it's almost doing engine braking all the time, and it's not quite coasting as you would expect, maybe because there's some charging element going on here, but it never quite settles down into a comfortable power delivery. I feel like I'm having to push the pedal more than I normally would have to. The engine sounds a bit strained, it feels a bit strained. The car isn't moving with the urgency that I expect of, you know, mild hybrids of the modern age. That paired then with the suspension, as I said, nothing like what we have in the hybrids. It's still very on edge, still very, very much feels like an AMG in that regard. And the steering doesn't really lighten up as it normally would when you come out of Sport Plus as well. So oddly, this is one of the few AMGs then that I've driven where normally you'd find a lot of breadth of ability on the comfort side as well. It doesn't really shift that much when you go into comfort mode. It stays quite on the harsher AMG side, which to my mind in a SUV like this, you're looking for a lot of comfort when you're using it normally, and I don't think you really get it in the GLC 43. And that's then where I begin to compare this car to my car, which is the GLC 300DE. Now, yes, it doesn't have as much power, and to access its full power you need to be in hybrid mode using both the electric motor and its 4-cylinder diesel engine. And it doesn't feel massively slower than this, but what it makes up for instead is A, giving you 60 miles of electric range, which is mega and it's really useful for a daily car. But B, it just feels so much more comfortable on the road. It's 5 to 6 times more comfortable to use in terms of its suspension, steering, power delivery, being able to go into EV mode as well. All of that really makes that car just feel several notches above this as a daily car. And it's not just then the comfort, but then for the same amount of money in the GLC hybrid, you're getting 60 miles of electric range, you're getting still a decent amount of power, you're getting an interior that in my opinion is a bit more interesting because you get more choice, and a car that looks pretty much as good. And I do love that car because of it. And I think the ideal would be for me is if I could have that type of plug-in with then this AMG engine and setup, and I could move from EV into AMG. This car I think would have done a lot better if it was a plug-in hybrid in that regard. I wouldn't swap my GLC hybrid diesel for this car, and I'm an AMG guy, I'm Mr. AMG, and that should say a lot to you, that this just doesn't bring it home in terms of the AMG side of things to me. So guys, in a strange way, I struggle with the concept of this car more than I was doing 2 years ago. 2 years ago I thought, right, this is a great alternate to the GLC 63, and to be fair, versus that specific car, it still is the better idea. But if I want an AMG GLC, honestly, I would go for the pre-facelift with the amazing V8, a car that was the king of the Nürburgring for so long, battling out versus the Stelvio Quadrifoglio. This car to me would make a lot more sense if it was a 6-cylinder hybrid like the E53 and the CLE53, and I hope AMG take it to that place in the facelift. And I'd love it even more if it was a plug-in and you got some electric range, because it daily needs it these days. Then you'd have the best of both worlds, where you have the AMG side but the ability to switch into electric for your daily needs, and that that would be great. As it stands though, I find my GLC 300 Hybrid a more convincing car in luxury and tech and the daily ability, and the X3 M50 a more convincing performance car in every metric. So while this is better than the 63, I think the GLC AMG family as a whole needs to change, and luckily I think we're not too far away from that. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Drop a like, a comment and subscribe to RBR, and I'll see you guys next time. A huge thanks guys for always watching our videos, and a quick reminder that our limited run of the new Exhaust On or Else t-shirt is currently available on the RBR website. This is a shirt that's never been about the channel, but more about our joint passion for great combustion engines, V8 and V12 sounds, and this is an all new version with some gorgeous details, a much larger metallic logo. This has been designed by us, and we've got some lovely details everywhere, even in the packaging. And it goes from not just the material that I'm using here with the extra stretch, the muscle fit, all the details you see there, and it was all made possible because A, we designed it from the ground up, and B, it was handmade in Pakistan. So I'm really, really proud of this shirt. It's a limited run. I really want you guys to get a hold of one and wear it proudly and show the world your love for great combustion engines. And of course, we still have things like the great RBR keyring to go along with your car. Head over to the RBR website, and again, thanks for watching, and do subscribe to RBR.